In 1830, a country was born because an audience watched the wrong opera. Belgium, a nation that arguably shouldn't exist, split from the Netherlands after theatergoers rioted. Then it handed its crown to a German-speaking Protestant prince to replace the Dutch-speaking Protestant king they had just overthrown. Nearly 2 centuries later, it's still here, and the reason why has almost nothing to do with national unity. In 1815, Europe's leading diplomats gathered in Vienna with a single goal: to prevent another French rampage across the continent. Their answer was simple: grab the map, glue together the Protestant North and the Catholic South, and call it the United Kingdom of the Netherlands. On paper, this Frankenstein's monster would be a fortress against Paris, a buffer state stretching from Antwerp to Amsterdam, with King William I, a Dutch Protestant, installed as the region's new landlord. Lord Castlereagh, Britain's foreign secretary, and Prince Metternich of Austria, both experts in the fine art of not trusting France, drove the plan. They sold it as a masterstroke, combined the southern province's wealth, coal, textiles, and a bustling port at Antwerp, with the Dutch navy and trade networks. The result, they argued, was a state big enough to block French armies, but not so big as to threaten Britain or Austria. The 1815 Act of the Congress of Vienna, signed with much fanfare, declared this new kingdom the official barrier to French ambitions. No one seemed too bothered that the southern Belgians were overwhelmingly Catholic, spoke French or local dialects, and had spent centuries under Habsburg rule. For the diplomats, local culture was just background noise. The real business was great power security and economic fusion, a customs union, a single army, and if the locals complained, well, that was a problem for tomorrow. Belgium, as it would later be known, entered the post-Napoleonic order not as a nation, but as a chess piece, wedged in place by men who saw borders as bargaining chips, not birthrights. Brussels, August 1830. The city's opera house is packed for a performance of La Muette dei Portici, a rousing tale of Neapolitan rebellion that, as it turns out, doubles as a pretty effective starter pistol for real-life revolution. By the time the tenor belts out his final aria, the audience has spilled into the streets, torching symbols of Dutch authority and chanting for liberty, religion, and the French language. It is less a planned insurrection than a spontaneous group project, but the effect is electric. News of the riot surges through Antwerp, Liege, and Ghent, carried by pamphlets, gossip, and the telegraph lines that William I had so proudly installed. Within days, city halls are stormed, barricades thrown up, and local committees formed, each one more convinced than the last that the Dutch king has overstayed his welcome. The Dutch army sent to restore order finds its ranks melting away. Southern soldiers, Catholic, local, and increasingly sympathetic, refuse orders or simply walk off, their uniforms swapped for rebel cockades. General Saxon-Holstein's reports back to The Hague sound more like resignation letters than battle updates. By early September, the king's southern regiments have evaporated. Discipline is a memory. The streets belong to the insurgents, who now seize the Brussels town hall and declare a provisional government. On October 4th, 1830, that government proclaims Belgian independence. A bold move, considering the ink is barely dry on the riot proclamations and the Dutch army is still technically in the country. Suddenly, there is a new political fact on the map: a self-declared Belgian state, born in the chaos of an opera-fueled uprising, staffed by a mix of liberals, clergy, and ex-militiamen. The revolutionaries have pulled off the improbable, toppling royal authority without a single unified ideology, but with plenty of help from defecting troops and a crowd that just wanted a good show. Now, with Europe's great powers watching nervously, the question is not just whether Belgium can survive, but whether anyone will let it. Diplomacy, it turns out, is just revolution with better table manners. As Belgian independence spread like wildfire, Europe's power brokers rushed to London, determined to keep the blaze from lighting up the whole continent. Britain's Lord Palmerston eyed the channel nervously. No way was he letting France snatch Antwerp and park its navy across from Dover. The French, led by Talleyrand, floated a partition plan to slice Belgium up like a diplomatic pie, with France, Prussia, and the Dutch each getting a piece. Palmerston stomped on that idea, insisting on a single, neutral Belgium, preferably one too polite to ever threaten anyone's breakfast. The negotiations dragged on, with every side more interested in what Belgium should not become than what it might be. The Dutch sulked, the Prussians grumbled about their borders, and the French licked their lips. But Palmerston kept the focus on neutrality. The solution was to find a king no one could object to. Enter Leopold of Saxe-Coburg, a German Protestant with just enough royal pedigree to reassure the conservatives and just enough distance from the Dutch to placate the revolutionaries. Crowning Leopold in 1831 was the ultimate act of compromise. Belgium got a monarchy, Europe got a buffer, and everyone got to pretend this was what they wanted all along. The final diplomatic flourish came in 1839, when the Treaty of London locked in Belgium's independence and, crucially, its neutrality. The great powers signed on as guarantors, promising to keep Belgium out of their squabbles, at least on paper. The country's borders were set, its monarchy installed, and its continued existence secured not by shared identity, but by the collective fear of what might happen if the map changed again. French ruled the roost in early Belgium, and not just in salons or poetry readings. After independence, the new state's constitution promised freedom of language, but in practice, French became the only passport to power. Ministries, courts, and universities all operated in French, whether you were in Brussels or a Flemish farming village. Dutch speakers in Flanders found themselves locked out of government jobs, legal rights, and even higher education. Meanwhile, French-speaking Walloons and the old aristocracy congratulated themselves on having finally thrown off Dutch rule, only to install a new linguistic pecking order of their own. But Belgium's story is nothing if not a game of pressure and response. By the mid-19th century, Flemish activists, school teachers, writers, and local officials began to organize. Their demands were not revolutionary. They wanted equal rights for Dutch in courts, schools, and administration. Petitions stacked up. Newspapers in Ghent and Antwerp published biting editorials, and mass meetings filled town squares with banners reading, "Gelijkheid voor de taal." The breakthrough arrived in 1873 with the Equality Law, which formally recognized Dutch as equal to French in legal proceedings. Implementation was patchy at best. Still, the law signaled that Belgium's unity would be hammered out through paperwork, not barricades. As one Flemish pamphlet put it, "We prefer stubborn negotiation to civil war." And a Walloon editor replied, "Better a bilingual Belgium than a divided one." The result was a country where identity politics became a matter of statutes and signatures, not street fighting, laying the groundwork for the Federal Balancing Act to come. In August 1914, German troops did not bother with Belgium's neutrality. They just marched straight through. The Schlieffen Plan, Berlin's blueprint for a quick knockout of France, called for German armies to sweep across the flat fields of Belgium, ignoring the ink on the Treaty of London of 1839. British politicians who had solemnly guaranteed Belgium's neutrality now faced an awkward question: defend a small country most could not find on a map, or let German boots reach the Channel ports. Britain declared war, citing the treaty. But the reality was less about legal principle and more about not letting Kaiser Wilhelm picnic at Dover. The German occupation was not subtle. Behind the front, high command memos toyed with carving Belgium in two, Flanders to be annexed into the Reich, Wallonia left as a German puppet. These partition schemes were less about local wishes and more about strategic convenience. After the war, the victors handed Belgium a consolation prize: the German-speaking cantons of Eupen and Malmedy, added in 1919 by the Treaty of Versailles. Now Belgium had a new minority and a border even more complicated than before. Fast forward to May 1940. Hitler's tanks blitzed through the Ardennes, brushing aside Belgian defenses in days. Brussels fell, the government fled, and Nazi planners dusted off old maps. Once again, partition was discussed. Flanders as a Germanic province, Wallonia as a satellite. None of these plans survived the war, but the lesson was clear. Neutrality, no matter how many signatures, could not keep Belgium out of Europe's wars. The state survived, but only after being trampled, sliced, and redrawn by powers who saw it less as a country and more as a convenient corridor. Belgium's post-war reality was less about battlefield heroics and more about paperwork, negotiation, and the art of not falling apart. By 1970, after decades of linguistic squabbles and regional protests, the country's politicians finally admitted what everyone in the cafes already knew. Belgium wasn't a unit, it was a balancing act. The first major constitutional reform that year gave real power to the country's language communities: Dutch, French, and German, laying the groundwork for a system that could bend without breaking. More reforms followed in 1980 and in 1988, each one devolving a little more authority to the regions, as if Belgium were a stubborn cake that kept slicing itself but never quite fell apart. In 1993, the fourth state reform made it official. Belgium was now a federal state, with Flanders, Wallonia, Brussels, and the German-speaking community each running their own show, at least on paper. Meanwhile, Brussels quietly became Europe's favorite meeting room. The city landed the headquarters of the European Union Commission and the NATO Council, turning Belgium's capital into a diplomatic crossroads. If you wanted to find a Belgian national identity, you were just as likely to stumble into a Eurocrat as a local. The irony: the very divisions that threatened to break Belgium apart also made it the perfect host for supranational institutions. Nobody could accuse it of being too French, too Dutch, or too German. Instead, Belgium became a kind of professional compromiser, surviving not by pretending to be unified, but by making itself indispensable to everyone else. Belgium is still here, still divided, still baffling both neighbors and itself. In a world of rising separatism and shifting alliances, its improbable survival is a lesson. Sometimes, being the necessary compromise beats unity or collapse. The buffer state endures. Irony, apparently, is a national export. Drop your thoughts below.